Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. I know we've missed a couple of weeks due to different circumstances, but I'm happy that we're back. We are in Melachim Aleph, chapter 2. We're in the middle of the chapter. Our goal for today is to try and complete chapter 2. So to refresh our memories where we left off, chapter 2, David officially transferred the kingdom to Shelomo. He gave him his final commandments, his final will and testaments, if you will, to handle certain loose ends that David left behind. So we saw on the positive side, he told him to make sure you're kind to Bnei Barzilai Hagiladi, people who helped David when he was running away from Avshalom and took him and gave him refuge and helped him out. They should always be people who are welcome on the table of Shelomo. On the flip side, Shelomo has a Yoav problem and a Shimei ben Gera problem. Yoav is definitely a threat to the Melucha. He's always somebody who has had tense relationships with David. David said he's the type of person who has killed different people for his own personal agenda or for political reasons. He can be a very big thorn in the side of someone like Shelomo, who's trying to build a stable, peaceful, new regime, where you have somebody who's, not liking what the person's doing and starts to do shady things on the side and kill certain people and political threats and personal vendettas. That's the type of person Yoav is. And so David tells Shelomo, you got to be very careful of somebody like Yoav, and ve'asita kechochmatecha, handle him in a very wise type of way to make sure that you keep him in check. Additionally, he saw that Shimei ben Gera could be a problem for Shelomo as well. Shimei ben Gera was the person who hurled stones and obscenities at David when David was running away from Avshalom. He gave him harsh criticism, public shame and humiliation. And then when David was coming back to assume the throne, Shimei, threw himself on the mercy of David, said, I'm so sorry for what I did, please forgive me, and David let him go. But David is basically telling Shelomo, this is not somebody you want to harbor around. There needs to be some consequences for his actions. Again, ve'asita kechochmatecha, do with him in your wisdom to make sure that he stays at bay. So that's where we've left off to this point. Another character who we're going to pick up with now in the middle of chapter 2 was Adoniah. Adoniah is Shelomo's half-brother, and he was somebody who tried to steal the throne away before David gave the throne to Shelomo. Adoniah went and held on to the corners of the Mizbeach to seek refuge from Shelomo, and Shelomo told him, if you stay in line and you don't do anything, you will be able to live. No harm will befall you. But if you don't, then there will be vengeance taken out. And Adoniah, unable to help himself, is going to make his misstep over here and suffer the consequences from Shelomo. We're up to verse 13, Pasuk Yud Gimel of chapter 2 of Melachim Aleph. Vayavo Adoniyahu ben Chagit el Batsheva em Shelomo. Adoniyahu, the son of Chagit, comes to Batsheva, the mother of Shelomo. Notice that he presents his request to her, not to Shelomo. Vatomer, and she says to him, Hashalom boecha, do you come with friendly intent? Vayomer shalom. Avshalom, Adoniah says, yes, I come in peace. So it seems what he's going to request is not threatening. Vayomer, he says to her, Davar li elayich, I would like to have a word with you. Vatomer daber, she says, fine, speak what's up. Vayomer, he says to her, At yada'at ki li hayta hamenucha. You should be aware, you know, that the kingship was rightfully mine. Ve'alai samu kol Israel penehem lamelech. And all of the Jewish people had already put their faith and trust in me to be the king. Vatisov hamelucha, but the kingship passed from my grasp. Vatihi le'achi, and it was given instead to my brother. Ki me'adonai haytalo. Because this was what the Ratzon Hashem was. This was the will of God, that it should go to Shelomo and not to me. Verse 16. Ve'ata, but now
wait.
Okay. Maybe I'm going too fast. Okay. Ve'od she'ela achat anochi sho'el me'itach. But now I have one more request that I wish to make of you. Al tashivi et panai. Please do not refuse me. Do not let me come up empty-handed. But Tomer elav dabed. She says to him, fine, what's the request? You can see a dragging out over here in this conversation between Adoniah and Bathsheba. Adoniah is manipulating this conversation. He's like hiding. He's going to try and smooth. And Bathsheba is like, no, out with it. What do you want? Right? It's almost like a parent talking to their teenage kid. The teenager comes, Mom, I noticed you redid your hair today and you look so good. And oh, I did well on my test. No, what do you want? Right? That's where Bathsheba is trying to get it out of him already. But he's trying to like soften up the conversation over here. Finally, she says, Dabed, no, what's going on? Verse 17, Vayomer, he says to her, Imrina l'Shlomo HaMelech, I kindly ask of you, notice his language, he's speaking very softly to Bathsheba, please speak to Shlomo the king, ki lo yashiv et panaich, that he should not refuse me my request, v'yiten li et Avishag HaShunamit le'isha, and that I should be able to marry Avishag HaShunamit. Who is Avishag HaShunamit? We know from last chapter. That is the girl who was brought, that was the girl, for no other term that we could possibly give. She's the sochenet, exactly, right? She was the one who was found to come and lay by David to warm David up when he could not get his body temperature. We know David did not have intercourse with her. He was not intimate with her. And we haven't heard about her again since then. And Adoniah requests that he be able to marry David's sochenet, Avishag. Now, what do you make of this request? How would you take it if you were Bathsheba? Why do you say that it's sneaky, Amy?
Because it's a very public. If he marries Abishag Hashmonami, he's putting himself sort of like in a light of being David's successor or something.
Right. He's putting himself in the light of David's successor. In other words, this is not an innocent request. Although Adoniah is presenting it as a very innocent request, you could tell that it's not an innocent request. We know that the king's property is of the most sensitive nature, right? We learned this from Avshalom, who first wanted to make a rebellion when he publicly, displayed the wives of David, concubines of David, and was intimate with them publicly as a way of showing everybody, I am taking over the Melucha. I am taking the reins from David. The ultimate sign of disrespect towards one's father or towards the king is taking their property, particularly the women that they had been intimate with. Now, we know that Abishag was not intimate with David, but nevertheless, he was certainly part, you could call, I hate to say it this way, because I'm speaking to a group of women, David's property, right? Essentially, that's what she was. And so the act of asking for her hand in marriage, right? Asking for Abishag's hand in marriage is a clear way of saying, I'm still in play for the Melucha. I could still grasp it out of Shelomo's clutches, right? Shelomo is still in, his kingdom is still in its infancy, right? So it's still teetering. He's trying to find stability. And so even though Adoniah backed away from Shelomo when he was crowned with David as the king, now David has passed away. There may be another moment for Adoniah to stir things up again and potentially snatch away the Melucha from Shelomo. He presents this to Bathsheba as like a, trying to, kind of trying to play, again, I don't want to make stereotypes with women, but like trying to play on the emotional trigger of someone like Bathsheba, right? Yeah, the kingdom was taken, so I should get at least Abishag, like let me not walk away empty-handed over here, right? And yeah. It seems to be public knowledge. It seems to be public knowledge that this was David. David did not have any intimate relations with Abishag. If it's not public knowledge, it makes the request even more egregious. Correct. So that's not going to make it any better. It's going to make it worse. But even without that, it's still a very daring request on the part of Adoniah. And that's why he doesn't present the request directly to Shelomo. He tries to go through a middleman, hoping that like Bathsheba will smoothen it out for him and play on Shlomo's emotions. And why should we not let him have a wife and so on? And so he's trying to create this dynamic, but at the same time, it seems very clear that Adoniah has feelings of resentment. He's trying to undermine the situation from behind the scenes. And one textual proof to this is notice how when he presents his request to Abishag, how does he open his request? You know, Bathsheba, that I was really supposed to be the king and that everybody had accepted me as king. And then Hashem came on the scene and said, fine, Shelomo's got to be the king. And they snatched it away from me. So I deserve at least this. You can see already in his language, Adoniah insidiously insinuating towards Bathsheba that I should really be the king. Yeah, he definitely needs permission, right? Because if he does this without permission, then he's a dead man. At least if he can try to find a way to get permission, he can at least sow the seeds of rebellion with, from within, so to speak, right? He could try to act in a daring way and do this forcibly, but we already saw that Adoniah is not somebody who will withstand a forcible face-to-face rebellion. He backed away the second Shelomo was coronated. He needs to do things in a more cunning, deceptive, under the radar type way before he really blows things up. And probably Adoniah is starting to sow the seeds, and then who's going to come in and help Adoniah to really blow things up? Yoav. Which is why right after Shelomo handles this situation, he's going to immediately turn his attention to Yoav. Because probably in Shelomo's mind, he's saying to himself, who maybe was behind that whole plot of Adoniah trying to take it? It may very well have been Yoav, pushing him from beneath the surface, right? Exactly. So that only triggers Shelomo even more to know how quickly he must act at this moment, at this critical stage of his melucha, to wipe away all potential instabilities that could undermine his authority. Why did Adoniah think he could do that? Well, he thinks that if he can convince Bathsheba and maybe somehow prey on the naivete of Shelomo. Shelomo is a young new king. Maybe he could take advantage of his inexperience, his youthfulness, and Adoniah can find his way in. Then once he finds his way in and then gains some support, he could blow it up. But he's got to find that inroad first before he does anything else, right? And Shelomo is not only fooled by Adoniah, he's also not fooled by Yoav as well. Yoav himself could be thinking, hey, let's see if I can sow this. And then if it doesn't work out, I didn't do anything, right? But Shelomo is too smart for that, right? This is where you see Shlomo's wisdom come to the forefront. Verse 18. Bathsheba is not taken aback by this. But Tomer Bathsheba, Tov, Bathsheba says, okay, sounds reasonable. Anochi adaber alecha el hamelech. I will speak on your behalf to the king. Bathsheba buys it, right? Verse 19, V'tavo Bathsheba el hamelech Shlomo. Bathsheba comes to her son, the king, ledaber lo al Adoniyahu, to speak to him about Adoniyahu. Vayakom hamelech likrata. The king stands from before her. It is, after all, his mother. Vayishtahula, and he prostrates himself before his mom. Vayeshev al kis'o, and then he sits upon his throne. Vayasim kiseh le'em hamelech, and he puts a special chair for the mother of the king to sit. Vateshev limino, and she sits to the right of the king. One thing to just pause on this, and we will see this theme throughout the book of Melachim. It seems as though when a person was crowned king, his mother received a governmental position. Somehow there was this position reserved for the mother of the king. It's not 100% clear exactly what the title was or what powers were necessarily given to her, but the mother of the king got a political position as a result of the new king being crowned, which is why we will see over and over again throughout the book of Melachim, Aleph and Bet, we will see that every time it mentions a new king, it will tell us who the king's mother is, because the king's mother will receive some level of a position in the government and will actually be very influential in some of the things that go on. This could also explain why Adoniah went to Bathsheba, because Bathsheba has political pull. She is a political figure who can bring his request to Shelomo. We did not have it with David. It seems to be a new institution, correct. But it seems as though these may have happened simultaneously, right? Okay. Verse 20. Vatomed, she says to the king, She'ela achat ktana anochi sho'elet me'imach. One small request I ask of you, right? she's almost echoing the same sentiments as Adoniah. Like, this is a simple thing. It's very harmless. Don't worry about it. Small request. How hard is it to grant me that? Al tashev et panai. Do not refuse me. This is his mother saying to him now. Vayomer la hamelech sha'ali imi. The king says, please, my mother, ask. Ki lo ashiv et panaich. I will not refuse you what your request is. He assumes she's going to request something, I don't know, mundane. Verse 21, Vatomer, yutan et Avishag Shunamit la'Adoniyahu achicha leisha. Please give Avishag the Shunamit to Adoniyahu, your brother, to be a wife. Shidduch. Let's make a bazra for Adoniyahu. That's the least we can give. At least he walks away with some level of, morale, as head held high. He's not totally a broken person as a result of this altercation. The king, the king responds to his mother. Noted, okay? Why exactly are you asking me for Avishag to be given to Adoniyahu? Why don't you just ask for the whole kingdom to be given to Adoniyahu? He is, after all, my older brother. And the priest Eviatar and Yoav ben Siruya are on his side. Shelomo sees right through this. He says, mother, you don't understand what this request is. You think it's she'ela ktana. This is just a matter of who he wants to marry. It's way, way beyond this. Asking for this, you may as well ask to give up the kingdom to him, right? Giving him Avishag HaShunamit. What message would that send to him? Would that send to the people? And he has Eviatar and Yoav on his side. He has powerful political people backing him. What would this say? This is not a simple request in the least bit, is what Shelomo says. And that's how it ends. Bathsheba probably realizes her silence is deafening. She realizes, wow, I did not see through what Adoniah was presenting over here. But Shelomo, despite his youth, despite his inexperience, his wisdom is far exceeding his years. And he immediately understands what's going on over here. And now he does not wait. He immediately takes action. Verse 23, Pasuk Kaf Gimel. Vayishava hamelech Shelomo b'Adonai lemor. The king Shelomo swears in the name of God. Ko ya'aseh li Elohim v'cho yosif. So may God do to me and even more. He benafsho diber Adoniyahu. He spoke with his life et hadavar hazeh, these matters. In other words, Adoniah put his life at stake when he made this request of me. And that's exactly what I'm about to take away from him. Verse 24, Ve'ata hai Adonai asher hechinani. He says, now as the Lord lives who has established me, hechinani from the word like mukhan, he made me established, he made me prepared. Vayoshivani al kiseh David avi, and he placed me upon the throne of David my father. Va'asher asali bayit ka'asher diber, and who has provided him with a house as he has spoken. Ki hayom yumat Adoniah. Today, Adoniyahu will be put to death. Shelomo wastes no time. And don't forget, Shlomo had warned him already. This does not come without a warning. Shlomo told Adoniah, don't step out of line. That's exactly what this was, no questions about it. And so immediately Shlomo acts. Verse 25, Vayishlach hamelech Shlomo biyad Benayahu ben Yehoyada, vayivgavo vayamot. Shlomo instructs David's trusted general, who now has joined Shlomo's force, and he instructs him to go and strike Adoniah, vayivgavo vayamot, and he goes and he seeks out Adoniah, and he strikes him and he kills him. So Adoniah, the first threat to the king, has been eliminated, right? And through no fault of his own. Sorry, only through fault of his own, I should say, right? He only has himself to blame. That's the phrase I was looking for. Okay, questions on that? Okay, very good. Now, you may have expected Shelomo to stop there. Okay, he neutralized Adoniah. Adoniah was the threat. He lets it go. We move on. Shelomo, however, does not see that to be the case. He says this did not happen on its own. This was influenced by others around Adoniah and was an insidious plan by a number of people to try and undermine my rule, right? And it was. And so therefore, Shelomo says, I'm not going to end it here at only Adoniah. There have to be other repercussions for other people who were involved. He starts with Eviatar HaKohen, but notice Shelomo, and again in his wisdom, is able to distinguish between who are the more severe threats and who are the less severe threats, and who he's going to treat with a more harsh hand, and who he's going to be a little more gentler. He starts with Eviatar. Eviatar is a priest, he's a Kohen, and Shelomo will definitely give him a consequence because he's on the side of Adoniah, but he will act a little more gentle with Eviatar than he does with Adoniah and Yoav, perhaps because he's a Kohen, perhaps for another reason. Let's read the next two Pesukim. Verse 26, Pasuk Kavvav. Ul Eviatar HaKohen Amar HaMelech, Anatot Lech Al Sadecha. To Eviatar HaKohen, the king said, you are banished to your field in a place called Anatot. That's where he was from. Anatot was a city of Kohanim. Anatot is very well known for being the hometown of a later Navi, Yirmiyahu HaNavi. Will also be from a place called, from this very same place called Anatot. So David banishes him into exile to his place Anatot to go back and work his field. Ki ish mavet ata. Shelomo says to him, you are a person as deserving of death. Ubayom hazeh lo amitem. But on this day, I will not put you to death, says Shelomo. Hinasata et Aron Adonai Elohim lifnei David avi. Because you carried the holy ark of the covenant. You carried the Aron HaKodesh before David, my father. And you suffered all of the same pains and sufferings that together with my father David. So because Eviatar went with David through all of his exiles and all of his rebellions, and he was loyal to David throughout his entire life, although he has now undermined David by siding with Adoniah instead of with Shelomo, and Shelomo chose other people to be his Kohen, Eviatar will have to suffer the consequences of banishment, but he will not be put to death. Shelomo does a little bit more gentle with him because he feels it would be improper to put him to death given all of the history that he has with his father David. So it's a show of hakarat hatov. It's a show of appreciation for what he did, and as a result, Shelomo does not go as far as to put Eviatar to death. Is Eviatar related to the Nov thing? The answer is yes, he is indeed related to the Nov thing, right? So if we back up to the book of Shemuel, and we remember that when David was running away from Shaul, he sought refuge in a place called Nov Ir HaKohanim. David was there, right? And David put them in a very precarious position. He made them support him. They gave him the sword of Goliath when he was there. And then David left. And what happened? Shaul ended up butchering the place of Nov because Doeg HaAdomi ratted the people of Nov out to Shaul, said David is seeking refuge over there. Shaul comes in and he butchers the entire city of Kohanim with the exception of one Kohen who escapes. Who's that? Eviatar HaKohen. Eviatar escapes. David, feeling the guilt of having brought this upon the city of Nov, tells Eviatar, I will take you in. Follow me, I will help you. And the two go hand in hand through all of the different runnings away from Shaul. And additionally, Eviatar carries the Aron HaKodesh out of Yerushalayim when David is running away from Avshalom. That pasuk is mentioned explicitly. I will show you where it is. The pasuk is in, where is it? It's in Shemuel Aleph. No, that was in the Nov Ir HaKohanim situation. I think it's also when he runs away from Avshalom, if I'm not mistaken. So the Abarbanel goes with what Esther said. The Abarbanel says, due to the fact that Eviatar was a high priest, he did not want to execute him, lest his house be treated like that of Shaul, who killed the priests of Nov. So in other words, Shelomo learns from the mistake of Shaul having butchered the Kohanim. He says, we got to be extra careful with the Kohen. So definitely the story of Nov Ir HaKohanim plays in the background of this in several ways. A, he may just not want to kill a Kohen the same way that Shaul had done and then suffered the repercussions of that. Secondly, it's the idea that Eviatar had supported David and was the only remaining Kohen from Nov Ir HaKohanim that went with David through all his trials and tribulations. Trying to look for the pasuk by Avshalom. I do remember that there was something there about that, but I'm not finding it now. Okay. Maybe not. Other questions or thoughts about that? Yeah.
So are we Eviatar is misguided in thinking that Adoniah has a claim to the throne? Or is he like politically corrupt at this point?
So Amy's asking what is Eviatar's thought process over here? Like, why is he involved with Adoniah? Why didn't he go with? It's a good question. What is Eviatar's motivation here? Yeah, he could be misguided. Again, don't forget Shelomo and David put a different person to be the Kohen, right? So perhaps he has feelings of resentment over the fact that he is no longer the Kohen. What does it say over here? It said, during the many long years that David and Eviatar had shared as fugitives from Shaul in caves and hideaways, Eviatar served as a critical function to David and his group. He provided direct link to God by means of the ephod that he carried. This ephod is referred to as the Ark of the Lord of God in our chapter. So some commentaries explain, what does it mean he carried the Ark, right? So one explanation is the literal Ark. The other explanation is it's talking about the ephod. We see numerous times David carried the ephod of the Kohen Gadol with him through Eviatar, and that ephod was used to question God, to ask questions of God. That's what gave David his ability to know where to go and what to do. So that ephod played a critical role in David being saved from Shaul, because he carried the ephod. And the ephod is given the name, the Ark of Hashem, the Aron Hashem over here. It's really bothering me that I cannot find, he says over here, one proscript is in order, however. In chapter 4, we read a list of Shelomo's cabinet, his government ministers, among whom Tzadok and Eviatar, Kohanim. So if we fast forward to chapter 4 of the book of Melachim, we will see that Eviatar is mentioned amongst the cabinet of Shelomo. What happened there? He says it appears that Eviatar is recalled to high office. Apparently, after the crisis of Adoniah, once the dust is settled, Shelomo sees Eviatar as a worthy figure to occupy a leadership position in the temple. So it may very well be that Eviatar got caught, right? He got caught in a bad spot. He got caught in a bad political game. He's not the same type of figure as Yoav. He's not this rabble-rousing, deceitful, insidious guy behind the scenes the way Yoav is. Eviatar, in Shelomo's eyes, is someone who got caught in a bad political game and sided incorrectly with somebody, maybe because of Yoav or whatever, and made a poor judgment call. But he's not a threat in Shelomo's eyes. He therefore says, look, you got to get away from this. Basically banishes Eviatar away from the political scene for a little bit while Shelomo handles the situation. And then he can bring Eviatar back to reintroduce Eviatar into a more calm and more collected scene where he's not going to side with the wrong people. That's I think, how we're potentially looking at Eviatar over here in this situation. And definitely Shelomo has feelings of connection to him because of what he did for his father. Eviatar's family was killed in the story of Nobi and Akwani. You might be thinking of the line of Eli versus the line of Tzadok, right? The Tzadok Kohen versus versus Itamar and the different right, Elazar and Itamar. Eventually, the Kihuna Gedolah goes through Elazar's lineage, although it was in Eli's possession, which is Itamar's lineage, and then was lost because of Eli's actions. So perhaps Eviatar is from the Itamar lineage. I'm not sure. It's possible. I have to double check and look into it. Right, maybe Eviatar felt his chances of retaining his position as Kohen Gadol were better suited with Adoniah than were with Shelomo. Right. Right, that is possible. I have to go ahead and look again at the family lineages to see if that is supported by that, but it's definitely possible. Okay, so that's the Eviatar situation. Pasuk 27, right? Vayikra Shelomo et Eviatar mihiyot kohen Adonai. Shlomo dismissed Eviatar from his office of priest to God. Lemale et devar Adonai asher diber al bet Eli b'Shilo. This is what Candice was talking about, to fulfill the word of God that was spoken about at the house of Eli in Shiloh. This is what Candice is talking about. It's the next pasuk. I don't know why we didn't just read it, right? Which is that Eviatar is a descendant of Eli HaKohen. And what was the curse of Eli going all the way back to when they first faltered at the beginning of the book of Shemuel, going back hundreds of years now, was that Eli would lose the kihuna. Their family would be dismissed as being kohanim. So basically, the text tells us that this curse, this promise was not fulfilled until this moment, when Shelomo finally removed the last vestiges of priesthood from the family of Eli HaKohen, who descends from Itamar, and fully transferred it over to Tzadok HaKohen. Even though Eviatar will be reintroduced as a political office, he will not retain the position of Kohen Gadol or Kohen in any type of way. So it's fascinating to see how God plays things out, right? Ultimately, it's the fulfillment of God's promise, but through the independent decision-making process of human beings. Had Eviatar made the right decisions, he would not have been dismissed as Kohen. It would have been later down the road. But here it's like everything merges together where Eviatar makes the wrong personal decisions, and as a result, Shlomo fulfills the word of God, and they sort of merge in this moment. That's it. We've lost it. It's over. Now you can come back. Yeah, now you can come back. Now Shlomo has to deal with a more challenging issue, and that is the Yoav issue. Here, he's going to go a lot more forceful because he understands what Yoav is capable of. Much worse things than the prior people he had to deal with. Verse 28. The news reached Yoav about how Shlomo is kind of cleaning house, right? Handling all these people. Yoav nata ahare Adoniah. For Yoav leaned in the position of Adoniah. Ve'ahare Avshalom lo nata. And he did not side with Avshalom. Vayanos Yoav el ohel Adonai. Vayahazek bekarnot hamizbeach. Yoav flees to the tent of God, and he holds on to the corners of the altar to seek refuge from Shelomo. Interesting, they mention over here that he did not go after Avshalom, that he went after Adoniah, but did not go after Avshalom, right? It's almost saying like, even though he did not side up with Avshalom, he's still being charged with the fact that he sided with Adoniah. Or it's possible that this is hinting to the fact that he killed Avshalom against his father's wishes, even though we said maybe David was being too soft on Avshalom. Nevertheless, that was the king's wishes. And so Yoav still undermined the king's command, which you're not allowed to do. So he didn't follow Avshalom, but he killed Avshalom, right? Verse 29. Vayugad lamelech Shlomo ki nas Yoav el ohel Adonai. It is told to King Shlomo that Yoav has fled to the tent of God. V'hine etzel hamizbeach. And behold, he is standing by the altar. Vayishlach Shlomo et Benayahu ben Yehoyada lemor lech pegabo. Shlomo sends his trusted muscle, Benayahu ben Yehoyada, and tells him, I want you to strike him down. Now that's interesting because we said if people are holding on to the altar, they have free passage, right? They're in a safe zone. Sounds like Shlomo is telling him, don't pay attention to that. Kill him anyway. Vayavo Benayahu el ohel Adonai. Benayahu comes to the tent of God. Vayomer elav. He sees that Yoav is holding on to the corners of the altar, so he speaks to him. He says to him, Ko amar hamelech tzeh. The king has so ordered you to leave. Vayomer lo. He tells him no. Ki po amut. I will die here. Benayahu is like, right? It's like a secret agent who finds himself in Switzerland, and he's like, I don't have jurisdiction here. I can't kill him here. But what am I supposed to do? The king told me to kill him. Stuck between a rock and a hard place. So Benayahu goes back to the king. Vayashev Benayahu et hamelech davad lemor. Benayahu sends word. He sends word back to the king, saying, Ko diber Yoav v'chanani. This is what Yoav has said. This is what he's answering. What should I do? How do I act? Like he radioed. I need a follow-up over here. Vayomed lo hamelech. The king says to him, Aseh ka'asher diber. Do like he said. He said he wants to die there. Let him die there. Ufkabo ukvarto. And strike him there and bury him. V'hasirota demeh hinam asher shafach Yoav me'alai u'me'al bet avi. So that you may remove the guilt from me and my father's house for the blood of the innocent that Yoav has shed. Yoav shed the innocent blood of multiple people. Going back, Avner, right, who was trying to make a deal with David in the beginning of Shemuel Bet, to try and unite the kingdom of Shaul and David back together. Yoav wasn't happy. He didn't trust Avner. Avner also had a personal vendetta against him because he killed his brother Asael, and Yoav did away with him in a very deceptive way. Secondly, he then killed Amasa, another general who was trying to unite the king after the king had come back after the Avshalom situation, and Yoav killed him too and left him to die on the side of the road. Very graphic scene. So Yoav is somebody who is known to be a loose cannon. And so Shelomo says we can't have people like that already. We have to rid ourselves of the guilt of the blood which he has shed. Verse 32, Ve'eshiv Adonai et damo al rosho, asher paga b'shnei anashim tzadikim v'tovim mimenu. Thus the Lord will bring his blood guilt down upon his own head, because he, unbeknown to my father, struck down with the sword 2 men more righteous and honorable than him. He killed them with the sword. My father did not know about it. He did it without permission. Et Avner ben Ner sar seva Yisrael, Avner the son of Ner, the general of the Jewish people, et Amasa ben Yeter sar seva Yehuda, and Amasa the son of Yeter, who was the chief general of the people of Yehuda. Verse 33, Veshavu demehem berosh Yoav, may the guilt of their blood come down upon the head of Yoav, uberosh zaro le'olam, and on the head of his children for all time. And to David and his lineage and his house and his throne, there shall be peace for all eternity from God. Verse 34, Vayal Benayahu ben Yehoyada, Vayivgabo Vaymiteu. Benayahu ben Yehoyada goes, he strikes him and he kills him. It sounds as though he struck him in that spot, on the Mizbeach, without any fear. Vayikaver beveto b'midbar. And Yoav was buried at his home in the wilderness. Verse 35, Vayiten hamelech et Benayahu ben Yehoyada tachtav ala tzava. The king officially appoints Benayahu ben Yehoyada to be the chief general. Ve'et Sadok HaKohen natan hamelech tachat Evyatar. And Sadok HaKohen is placed to be the high priest instead of Evyatar. Verse 36, Vayishlach hamelech. Okay, let's pause there. Verse 36 is going to change now to Shim'i. We'll talk about that in a moment. Yes?
He's holding on. So what? He's one guy.
It's like, pull him out? I think it may have been more of Shelomo wanting to send a message. People who are political enemies or enemies of the stability of the kingdom of Israel, they don't get refuge on the Mizbeach either. I don't mind to strike him right then and there. No. Nope, not going to come back to bite Shelomo. Shelomo did the right thing. Essentially, the Torah does not grant refuge to people of such sorts. And therefore, Shelomo has no fear of taking care of Yoav in that position at all.
Solomon was very close to his father because he knew about all of these machinations and he knew their feelings. It wasn't like he was just stepping into the throne now and it's all new to him. He knew the background.
You're saying Shelomo knew the background. I don't disagree with you. I think Shelomo understood very well, or at least was caught up to speed very well, right? And very quickly to know exactly what took place and what needed to be done at that point. Yes. Shelomo, we do not see any fear, hesitation on the part of Shelomo. He is not indecisive. He knows exactly what he needs to do. He's been briefed very clearly, and he understands how he's going to bring stability to his kingdom to be able to launch them into the next more glorious period of their existence, which is what he needs to do. Yeah, 100%. No question. Okay. There was one thing that I wanted to share over here. Here is Abarbanel's explanation to some of what goes on over here, because really there's kind of like different ways you could look at what Shelomo is doing. One way to look at what Shelomo is doing is that he's enacting justice. He's doing what's right. On the other hand, you could say he's just acting politically. He's trying to make sure that there's political stability. Third possibility is he's trying to seek revenge for the people who did wrong to his father, that he has like this vendetta against certain people who have done things wrong. And each of those different perspectives kind of has a different connotation to it, right? If it's like a vendetta against them, why did David do them? Why did Shelomo have to be the one to do it? And is that what we really want? Do we want to usher in a new kingdom seeking revenge against people? On the other hand, on a political scale, he did need to do what he needed to do to gain stability. And if we say that what he's doing is justice, right, is straightness to give people what it is, then you could say, why didn't David do it? But at least we could justify for Shelomo why he's doing it. So there's all these different angles that you could kind of look at it. So Abarbanel has a nice approach over here, right? Abarbanel says, David did not command Solomon to execute Yoav and Shim'i for earlier crimes for which he himself did not have them executed. Don't read this as Shelomo tying up the loose ends that David himself couldn't do. right? That Shlomo is taking vengeance on behalf of his father. He doesn't want to read it like that, the Abarbanel. Rather, his thinking and intention was to inform Shlomo of the manner in which Yoav and Shimei had acted against him in order to caution him not to appoint them to high office out of concern that they could manipulate him, Shlomo, and act in a manner similar to the way that they had behaved to him, David. The purpose of this bequest was counsel and education, that he should be warned, he should be wary of them and punish them vociferously should they betray him. In other words, you could understand that when David is giving his last will and testament to Shlomo and saying, deal with these people in your wisdom, and then eventually he comes to kill them, it was not David saying, hint, hint, kill them. I want you to go and, stand up for me. No, David was telling him, look, you have to be wise to these people. This is what I'm leaving you with. I'm leaving you with these type of people who are sitting there in the weeds and they're dangerous. You might have the temptation to say, Yoav, you be my chief general. After all, he did it for many, many years, very successful at what he did. And in many ways, he helped David a tremendous amount. We cannot discount some of the positive things that Yoav has done over time. David is telling Shlomo, you must be very careful. I've been burned too many times from Yoav doing something on the backside. You need to make sure that you take care of him in a way that sees fit. You got to keep him in line and in check. So Shlomo's plan at that moment may not have been, I'm going to find a way to kill Yoav, right? But when Adoniah steps out and Shelomo realizes that's Yoav playing his cards, Shlomo says, I gotta go after him, right? So it's not Shlomo taking the vengeance of David. It's Shlomo playing the cards that David had dealt him very, very properly to ensure the stability of his kingdom. That's the way Abarbanel kind of reads it in a little bit of a different way, and maybe you could be tempted to read it, which is Shlomo is in charge of taking care of the dirty work that David himself, just for whatever reason, wasn't willing to or could not take care of.
That dirty work had they not.
That's the point. That's the point. The question is, was Shlomo planning this from the beginning, or was it that they stepped out of line so Shlomo reacted? So one way you could say is Shlomo was going to do this one way or another, regardless, right? Or you could say, no, Shlomo was going to leave them as is until they stepped out of line, and then Shlomo had to keep things in check, right? There's different ways of potentially reading it. Okay, so I just thought that would be just important mention over here. Okay, let's get to the final story of chapter 2. This is the story with Shimei ben Gera, the one who had cursed David on his way out and then begged for forgiveness, which David spared him. What does Shelomo do with Shimei? The king calls for Shimei to appear before him. He says to him, build for yourself a home in Jerusalem, and you are to remain there. You are not to leave that area here or there. You're not allowed to go anywhere. You're basically putting Shimei on parole. I guess, is that the right word, right? House arrest to a degree, exactly. He's telling him, you cannot exit this area, right? I say parole because it's not just going to be his house, it's going to be even a little bit of the periphery as well. I don't think Shelomo thinks it's reasonable for him to stay in his house the whole time, but he basically gives him a boundary and says, you're not allowed to go within this area, anywhere outside of this area. The minute you do, the ankle bracelet's going to go off and we're done with it, right? On the very day which you shall go out and cross the Wadi of Kidron, you shall surely know that you will die. Your blood will be on your head. So here, Shimei, you can live in your home, in Yerushalayim, within this radius. You carry out the rest of your days, no problem. Beyond that, you cannot go. Right? Perhaps this was to confine Shimei towards not gaining any political power, not being able to garner support from other people to potentially start up another rebellion, not be able to connect with the people from Binyamin, his home tribe, to potentially stir up feelings of animosity towards Shlomo. Shimei is being kept in a box so that as a threat to the state, he's held in check. But he's not being killed. He's being told you could live out your days, you're fine. Verse 38, says Shimei to the king, your servant will do just as the Lord your king has spoken. This is what I'm going to do. Shimei remains in Jerusalem for an extended period of time. Seems like he obeys the king. But as it always comes to pass, time goes by and Shimei falters. Verse 39, ויהי מקץ 3 שנים, ויברחו שני עבדים לשמעי, אל אחיש בן מאכה מלך גת. 3 years later, 2 slaves of Shimei run away to Achish, the son of Gat. ויגידו לשמעי לאמור, the news comes to Shimei saying, הנה עבדיך בגת. Your servants have run away to Gat. Now Gat is not within boundary which Shimei has been given license to travel. Verse 40, ויעקום שמעי ויחבוש את חמורו. Shimei gets up, he saddles his donkey, וילך גתה אל אחיש. He goes to Gat, to Achish, לבקש את עבדיו, to request his servants be returned to him. וילך שמעי, ויבא את עבדיו מגת. Shimei goes, and he retrieves his servants from Gat. This information is then told to Shelomo. How will he deal with it? Verse 41, Mem Aleph, ויוגד לשלמה כי הלך שמעי מירושלים גת וישוב. Shlomo is informed that Shimei left Yerushalayim to Gat and returned home. Verse 42, וישלח המלך ויקרא לשמעי ויאמר אליו, הלא השבעתיך באדוני ואעיד בך לאמור ביום צאתך והלכת אנה ואנה, ידוע תדע כי מות תמות. תאמר אלי טוב הדבר, שמעתי. Says the king Shlomo to Shimei, did I not make you swear and testify to you that on the day in which you left this boundary, you shall surely know that you are going to die. Tomer Eli, he says to him, and he said to him at the time, Tov hadavar shamati. Yes, I heard what you said, and he acquiesced it. So Shlomo says, didn't we have a deal? What happened to our deal? Umadua lo shamarta et shivuat Adonai. Why did you not abide by the swear of God, the oath of God? And the command which I have commanded you. Verse 44, Vayomer HaMelech El Shimei. The king then further continues. It's almost as if you're waiting for a response here from Shimei, but none is offered. He doesn't say anything. The king just continues to speak. It's almost a silence in the middle. Yeah. Yes, he made him take a shivu'ah in the name of God. Correct. Shimei took an oath in the name of God that he would not transgress the king's word. Sorry. Yes. Verse 44. Vayomer HaMelech, the king continues to say to Shimei, Ata yadata et kol hara'a asher yada levavecha. Now he throws the kitchen sink at him. He says, you are well aware of all of the evil that you've had in your heart. Asher asita leDavid avi. That which you did to my father. Ve'heshiv Adonai et ra'atcha beroshecha. He says, and now God is going to bring your wrongdoings upon your head. In other words, this is not your first misstep. You've made several missteps to this point, things that are quite unforgivable, even though we've forgiven you for them. This one we're not letting go. Verse 45, V'hamelech Shelomo Baruch, V'chised David yeh nachon lifnei Adonai ad olam. But King Shelomo shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. Verse 46, V'yitzav HaMelech et Benayahu ben Yehoyada, V'yetze v'yivga bo v'yamot, v'hamamlacha nechona b'yad Shelomo. The king gave orders to Benayahu ben Yehoyada. He went out and he struck down Shimei and he died. The kingdom was therefore secured in the hands of Shelomo. The final threat to Shlomo's instability is taken care of. Shlomo's kingdom is now firmly established. His hand and his wisdom, and his strength of his hand and his wisdom are starting to become legendary in the eyes of the people. They recognize what he did. They're steadfast with Shlomo. And this is only going to grow as the chapters go on. Chapter 3 is when we're going to see Shlomo's wisdom really catapult into a new strata as far as the people are concerned. The people will be in awe of Shelomo when they see the way he judges the people and the wisdom that he has that has been granted to him by God.
Yeah, but it starts with such like negative words. Like it's like, all right, now we could take a pause, we could be appreciative, we got to this point, and then like
you're saying the beginning of chapter 3 when he marries the daughter of Paro. There will already start to be seeds a little bit of maybe some of what will eventually plague Shlomo in the beginning.
Right.
But the first chapters of Shlomo are largely and overwhelmingly positive. Yeah, the rise of Shlomo is going to be something that is unparalleled anywhere else in Tanakh, and his pinnacle is going to be something that no one else in the history of Jewish history has been able to duplicate. The golden age that Shlomo ushered in is, unparalleled. Problem is, to get there, some things had to happen that weren't so on the up and up, which come back to eventually haunt Shlomo on the way down, right? So it's like, be good to the people on the way up, because you never know who you're going to see on the way down. That's kind of what Shlomo is going to have to go through a little bit. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that the whole beginning of his kingship was killing this one, banishing this one, killing this one, killing this one. And it's exactly what they had said about why David could not build the Beit HaMikdash because he was
Bloodthirsty, right? Yeah.
Up with blood, and he's the peaceful guy.
Right. But let's remember the circumstances upon which Shelomo did are very different than the ones that David had to deal with. Shlomo deals with things very deliberately, very fairly, gives each of the people an opportunity to redeem themselves and to potentially live peacefully within his kingdom. It is through their own faults that they're the ones who bring the wrath of God upon them. Shlomo is not actively pursuing them or aggressively attacking them. He's simply responding to the fact that if you're going to threaten the peaceful nature of our kingdom, then there's no room for you over here, right? And so, yes, you could look at it. What is typically done is a king comes in and right away he just butchers anybody who he deems as a threat to him, right? This is what happens in all dictatorships and in all monarchies. It looks after the fact as though that's what Shlomo did. But when you read the circumstances and the details about how he reached there, it's very, very different. You have to have that nuance to see the difference between what's going on here. It's worth noting over here, the question is, it seems a little, you could read the story of Shimei ben Gera as a little like, I don't know, did Shlomo kind of set him up a little bit? Like Shlomo put him in house arrest, did a thing, the guy left to go get his servants. Like, did he really do something that terrible, right? Huh? So rules are rules, but then the way that gets looked at is almost like Shlomo put Shimei in a situation where he was waiting for him. It's almost like a trap. He put him in this situation, waiting for him to do the misstep so that he could jump on him. And that's kind of what we're not trying to say Shlomo did. We want to stay away from the idea that Shlomo trapped Shimei in this way. So maybe there's something else that another threat that Shimei poses that we're not giving enough credit for. So I'd like to read to you over here from Rabbi Israel's book. He writes very nicely. He says, what danger does Shimei pose to Shlomo? As a leader of the northern tribes, Shimei commands significant political leverage. David is concerned that Shimei will stir up old grievances and old tribal animosity between the house of Shaul and the house of David, between Binyamin and Yehuda. We can never forget about the rift that exists between those two tribes, which needs to make sure that it's maintained. Maybe, yeah. Shelomo keeps Shimei under house arrest, under surveillance, but Shimei makes a wrong move when two Shimei's servants flee to Achish, king of Gath. He pursues them, and Shelomo has him executed for violating his probation. At first glance, it seems that Shelomo is overreacting. After all, if this is an innocent act of retrieving runaway slaves, then Shelomo is exacting an extreme price for a simple and innocuous act. On closer examination, however, the mention of Achish Melech Gath by his official royal title leads us to believe, along with Shelomo, that this is a venture of political meddling on Shimei's part. In other words, the fleeing of the servants and the retrieving of the servants was what? It was a cover. It was a cover, right? Gath is where the Pilishtim are. That's the old hub of the enemies of the Jewish people, the Pilishtim. That's where David sought refuge from Shaul because he had to run to a different political enemy, right? Right, they went to the Achish Melech Gath, right? In other words, he's viewing it as a cover for a political rebellion that they may be stirring up together. Shimei has made an appointment with the rival king, not an innocent journey to retrieve lost slaves. Shimei, vacillating and unreliable, who has huge influence in the tribe of Binyamin, and who curses people when they are down and apologizes when his adversary is ascendant, is not to be trusted. Shelomo does not wait to find out what lies behind the visit. Shelomo does not wait to see what exactly are they plotting. No. Instead, he sends a clear message to Binyamin and other political factions as to who is in command. Shelomo definitely tightens up his grip on the people and says, look, you want to live with me under my rule? We can have a very peaceful, very successful very, very thriving kingdom. You want to try to do games, you want to try to play games, this is not the spot for playing games. And he tightens his leash upon the kingdom. Our chapter ends on a high note, and the kingdom was established in the hands of Shelomo. These opening 2 chapters have narrated the tale of Shlomo's rise to power and the elimination of his enemies. We are curious about this fresh young king. What drives him? What does this portend for this new era? Chapter 3 will give us a good indication of Shlomo's central concerns and passions. Now that Shelomo has this firm grip on the kingdom, he's gotten rid of his enemies. What is his kingdom going to be founded upon? What will be the mission statement of Shlomo's kingdom? What will he try to accomplish? What goals will he try to achieve during his time as king? Is going to begin now in chapter 3, as he has the full faith and trust of the Jewish people in his corner. Questions? Wonderful. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen.